For as long as I can remember, video games have been an important part of my life. From early on, video games had this aura of wonder that left me staring at the screen in awe. When I got into school, gaming was the common denominator for many of the boys in my class. We bonded over our shared enthusiasm for games, which resulted in long-lasting friendships. For a long time, video games had been just that, games. I rarely spent time thinking about what I was consuming. I played games because they allowed me to get immersed in completely different worlds. Fast forward to more than a decade later, video games have changed and so have I as a player. I've become more interested in the cultural impact of games, which has led me to question many aspects of contemporary video game culture. Ever since their creation, games have caused both fascination and fear among the general public. Countless studies have approached games and their involvement in violence and aggressive youth behavior. Gender issues in video games, however, are still widely missing from modern discussions of video games. Therefore, I decided to dedicate this video to the study of gender issues and their consequences in video games and contemporary video game culture. More specifically, I want to address the question of how women are represented in video game content and the social cultural spaces of gaming. My name is Chris, and this is Gamer's Delight.
Is that a girl? A girl gamer?
Do me a favor, leave this lobby. Can you do me a favor and give me a poppy bagel? Put the extra things.
Is a bitch talking to me? Is a female talking to me?
First, I'd like to offer a brief overview of video games in a cultural studies context. Given their age and tremendous success, it's surprising to see that the examination of games and gaming culture has only recently been established as a proper discipline. There's no doubt that video games are the most influential form of digital entertainment, as the video game industry keeps outperforming both the music and the film industry. The first wave of writing about video games started in the 1970s, when consumer magazines began publishing analyses and reviews of popular video games. While these publications were produced without serious academic interest, they highlighted the rise in demand for a serious discussion about games. For many years, video games have constantly been criticized by politicians and the general public for allegedly causing violent behavior among adolescents. Even today, video games are still mentioned in light of tragedies like school shootings. Although the frequency of such accusations has decreased, the mere existence demonstrates that the medium is not yet fully accepted and still in dire need of further research. In the last few years, research about video games has become broader and more thorough. The existence of numerous dedicated peer-reviewed journals can at least be seen as an indication that research is progressing. Nonetheless, there's little doubt that the study of video games still lacks the recognition that areas like film studies have. Over the past few years, feminist criticism has moved into public discourse about video games to spread awareness of the subordination of women in video game subculture. This is deemed an important step into enabling further research, as feminist philosophers have ignored video games for a long time. While the discussion about gender has moved on to mainstream media and gained public attention, issues of gender portrayal in video game subculture are far from being fully researched. This is a colossal task, of course, because it demands research to keep up with the rapid development and publishing of video games themselves. This discrepancy has created a situation in which many components of video game culture have not yet been really touched upon by academics. Racial issues, for instance, are only now becoming a prominent field in game studies, while video games continue to change rapidly, thus further complicating the distribution of research resources. Although the number of scientific studies is still scarce at best, there have been a number of noteworthy attempts to examine the relation between video game content and gender. I consider the following studies as the most influential works in this regard. Reviewing these studies in chronological order can help us understand the broad range of gender issues within video games. Each study on its own is only able to shed light on very specific areas, but in combination, they allow us to look at gender issues in a broad way. One of the first noteworthy studies was conducted by Baron Beasley and Tracy Collins Stanley in 2002. They analyzed a random selection of 47 video games that were available for the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64. The study showed that of all the characters, 71% were male, 14% were of undeterminable gender, and only 13% were coded as female. Regarding the visual representation of the characters, women were usually shown less clothes than men. Of all female characters in this study, 2% were found to have a flat chest, while 40% were rated to be extremely voluptuous, with many of the latter considered to be portrayed with unrealistically large breasts. Consequently, it was argued that female characters were vastly underrepresented and portrayed in a sexualized manner. The researchers Mu and Peng focused on the analysis of gender portrayals in promotional video game material. For that purpose, they chose to conduct a small-scale content analysis using trailers, introductory films, and cover art of 19 of the most popular video games in 2007. A staggering 31.6% of trailers came without any female character. Most of the game trailers without female presence were sports, action, and adventure games. All lead characters, including antagonists, were male. Supporting characters, on the other hand, were more diverse, as 43.4% of them were female. At the same time, women were more likely to be portrayed as being in need of rescuing by male characters. In terms of physical appearance, 58% of all female characters were coded as unrealistically thin, while a fourth of them were shown with revealing clothing. Teresa Lynch et al. Have produced the most recent and ambitious content analysis concerning stereotyped and sexualized gender portrayal in video games. The researchers created a list that featured all playable female protagonists from 1983 to 2014, which resulted in a net amount of 1,527 games. The researchers were able to prove significant differences concerning the sexualization of characters. Between 1983 and 1991, there was generally only a limited amount of sexualization of video game characters due to the restrained graphical capabilities of that time. Between 1992 and 2006, video game characters were more than twice as heavily sexualized as developers began to explore what they were able to portray using state-of-the-art graphics. For the time after 2007, the researchers noted a steady decline in sexualized video game characters. One could argue that this is an indication for the industry reacting to the criticism concerning gender portrayal and trying to reach a greater female audience. Despite their different aims, these studies have unanimously shown that games have a long history of problematic gender portrayals. Women in games are underrepresented, hypersexualized, and their importance to the plot is often downplayed. It is therefore fair to say that video games have always reproduced a very traditional gender role portrayal that highlights distinct differences between men and women and their respective duties, skills, and functions. In all fairness, it can be argued that this kind of stereotyping is not exclusive to female gender roles, but also frequently occurs with male characters who are likely to be shown as muscular, tough, and fearless. However, the stereotyping of women remains far more prevalent and prejudicial. Many studies have shown that women are commonly portrayed in traditional and sexualized gender role images. This raises the question whether and how this representation of gender influences the players. The vast majority of theories about media effects have originally been developed for traditional mass media. Many researchers argue that transferring these theories should not be problematic, especially given the overall similarities of these media forms. In fact, more and more games actively imitate the style of Hollywood productions and adapt well-established techniques. Others, however, would rather see game studies develop their own, more specified theories. While the debate about this is still very much in full swing, using pre-existing approaches and theories is accepted as a temporary solution. One of the main concerns regarding gender portrayals in video games is the fact that both men and women are commonly shown in separate, gender-typical roles. Women, for that matter, are often depicted in secondary roles, while men are portrayed as the ones that control the situation. Bandura's and Bussi's social cognitive theory of gender development and differentiation can be used as a theoretical framework to show how these images can affect gender-related attitudes. Similar to gender schema theory, where individuals are believed to update or expand their gender identities using information they get from interacting with people and ideas, The authors of the social cognitive theory propose that social innovations are the main interest for observational learning. Gender role learning starts at an early stage of life, and children usually use examples to learn about gender role expectations. If they see men doing a certain task far more frequently than women, they're inclined to believe that this activity is in fact for men only. This is an everlasting learning process and not limited to children. Therefore, if we see women only portrayed as weak, dependent secondary characters in games, we might view this as legit information about gender roles. Exposure to games, therefore, often equals the reproduction of gender stereotypes and can severely affect our gender role images. Prior research on the effects of gender representation in TV and film has also shown that unrealistic and sexualized depictions of women can negatively affect how we see ourselves and may result in poor body image and even harmful behavior like unhealthy diets or risky cosmetic surgery. Naturally, games are not the sole origin of the social-cultural pressure revolving around body images. They do, however, repeat and reinforce these messages, which arguably affects how we relate to ourselves and each other. Further studies have been dedicated to the immediate effects of playing games with sexualized video game characters. Morowitz and Mastro conducted an experiment where participants were asked to play a gameplay sequence and then report on how they feel. The study showed that playing games as a sexualized character resulted in less favorable attitudes towards women and a diminished self-efficacy for female players. However, media effects are immensely ambiguous. Identification processes in video games also have the potential to show marginalized groups that they are recognized in society and important for the medium. Studies have shown that diversity in media texts can indeed change how acceptable one is of his or her identity. Generally, video games offer an opportunity to experience the world from someone else's perspective, regardless of whether the player shares characteristics with the character in question. Representing and experiencing diversity in video games can offer identification to those who are marginalized, while also offering a chance for mainstream groups to get a better understanding of the viewpoint of the underrepresented. For a long time, identity had been assumed to be a constant. More recent approaches, however, have deemed identity to have the potential to be changed based on societal and personal influences. According to the American gender theorist Judith Butler, gender identities are part of a performance and thus based on a variety of criteria that can change over time. Performing gender, therefore, relies on repeating the actions one observes, which in turn contributes to gender construction. How, though, are things on the other side of the screen? If stereotypes are anything to go by, then video games are indeed made for a male audience. While the stereotype of the pale, antisocial basement dweller has long been discarded, participating in video game culture is still seen as a male hobby. This belief, however, is seemingly contradicted by the fact that 46% of players identify as female. Regardless, female players are still often considered an insignificant minority. This contradiction stems from the assumption that there's an inherent difference between male and female players. This becomes obvious when we consider what we interpret as gamers. The fact that female players are referred to as gamer girls already demonstrates the perceived difference between male and female players. There is no equivalent for male players because the term gamer in itself is by default male. Researchers do suggest that men and women prefer different kinds of games. Male players are assumed to prefer playing in competitive environments, whereas female players are said to tend to play games that emphasize social interactions. As a result, female gamers are often linked with only playing casual or mobile games. This needs to be taken into account when considering demographic statistics. The ESA's data disregards factors like time investment, platform, genre, and length of play. As such, that data creates a distorted image. More detailed research conducted by the market research company Quantic Foundry shows that the percentage of female gamers highly depends on the genre in question. This is important because those who consider themselves core gamers frequently consolidate the assumption of the male-dominated subculture by painting women as inauthentic, casual gamers. Doing so further marginalizes the presence of women in gaming culture. This often goes hand in hand with the belief that women are less skilled gamers and that their supposedly limited skills dampen their understanding of game mechanics. While a survey conducted among 18,000 League of Legends players showed that male players had higher skill levels, it also showed that women acquired skill at the same pace. The difference in skill level could, therefore, be explained by the fact that male players just play more frequently. Another issue is the fact that marketing is still a highly gendered practice. Despite the steady increase of female players, the marketing focus of games remains predominantly male. Since men are seen as the default subjects in video game culture, they are more likely to be targeted as potential customers. Despite their cultural influence, video games will always remain a product designed to generate revenue. For that reason, market analysts try to increase the likelihood of success by targeting only one very specific group, as targeting too many people at the same time can result in failure. This can be traced back to the 1983 video game crash, which practically forced game studios to choose more specific audiences, which was then believed to be mostly male. Even today, marketing assumes a clearly segregated audience and produces advertisements that either exclude or objectify women. In 2012, when Sony released the PlayStation Vita, the company faced major criticism after publishing a sexist print ad in a French gaming magazine. Sony later apologized for the photo and said that it was only intended to be seen by the mostly male attendants of the Paris Game Week. Video game marketing contributes to a feedback loop in which the reduced visibility of women in gaming can result in women feeling unwanted and sidelined. Subsequently, they might be less likely to be interested in gaming than men. The notion of the male player has thus become a stereotype that continuously reinforces itself. Another frequent issue for female players is the fact that they often face exclusion or outright abuse in online communities. When playing games that support voice or text chat, women are often targeted with sexist, sexual, or even threatening comments just for their presence in perceived hardcore game spaces. Online games, especially competitive ones like shooters, are frequently a hostile environment for all players. Being exposed to trash talking has almost become a norm in today's online culture.
Learn how to fucking shoot a gun, you
Riot Shield. What else do you want me to
Oh, Riot Shield! I'm a pussy that use Riot Shield!
But while verbal abuse is not solely targeted at women, the abuse of female players is often purely based on their gender. In fact, female players are 3 times more likely to be targeted than men. Because they fear further abuse, women are significantly less likely to use voice chat in online games. Studies have shown that only 28% of female players communicate using voice chat when playing online, whereas 71% of male players reported to do so. Even when women are not openly harassed, they are frequently confronted with the fact that they are perceived as a minority. This is also reflected in player behavior, as women are more likely to experience positive discrimination in those games where they are part of the minority. Here, female players get advantages or attention that male players usually do not receive.
Hey, does anybody have any ammo?
While positive discrimination is not as bad as outright harassing female players, it still highlights the marginalization of female players. As a consequence, female players either distance themselves by not disclosing or changing their identity or quitting video games altogether. They are practically denied the chance to become visible performers of the gamer identity without abandoning their own. Analyzing who plays video games is crucial when assessing gender issues, but analyzing who makes games is certainly no less important. As developers and designers play an important role in the conceptualization and production of games, they possess tremendous influence over the game's content. A voluntary survey held at the 2019 International Game Developers Association showed that a mere 22% of developers and industry workers identified as female. Looking at more detailed data sets shows that this is a problem that persists throughout all branches of the video game industry, although some are more affected than others. The vast overrepresentation of men in the industry frequently results in a work culture where the male perspective is seen as the default. The absence of women in the gaming industry is often seen as a major reason for representational issues in video games. Film industry research has shown that the absence of female influence on the creative process results in increasingly negative portrayals of women in movies. Now, given that almost 80% of video game developers identify as male, it is natural to expect that this directly affects content and representational questions. Luckily, recent studies have shown that more and more women are being employed in the video game industry as studios and publishers make efforts to appear more progressive. However, one should not forget that these efforts will remain without long-term impact if the industry fails to retain those women. So far, this video has shown that games and gaming culture are riddled with gender issues. And while I don't want to imply that there is an easy solution, I am confident that we all agree that something has to be done. Naturally, there have already been impactful suggestions and changes, but there is still a long way to go, with many suggestions being too far away from reality for the time being. A frequent proposal is offering more thorough character customization. However, instead of having to create a female lead character with narrative weight, developers would then transfer that responsibility over to the player, fully aware of the fact that a custom character does not offer the same experiences as a fully fleshed out character. Creating believable characters requires more work, as the designers and writers have to develop a unique story, behavior, and background for their character, instead of offering a character editor where the player is left with a choice of gender, body size, and eye color. Eventually, the goal has to be to normalize the presence of independent female characters, as this would allow for more egalitarian culture for both male and female players. This is a shared responsibility among designers and players alike. The developers need to be encouraged to create more female characters that are not confined by traditional limitations of gender representation. Some scholars suggest enforcing stricter rules using organizations like the ESRB. It's already been proven to be an effective measure to filter out nudity and sexual content from video games, and it's therefore possible to assume that the same could be done for overtly stereotyped characters. That being said, this would not comment the existence of those characters per se. While the youngest and most gullible players could be protected, the content in question would remain largely unaffected for players who meet the age restrictions. Furthermore, it's worth noting that there are only limited options to enforce the ESRB's ratings. The accounts and experiences of female players have illustrated the obstacles that women face when participating in video game culture. Fortunately, publishers have started to understand the impact their games can have on the players and introduce changes to the way they approach toxic online behavior. Riot Games, for instance, has actively worked on improving the quality of social interaction in League of Legends, which had previously built up a reputation for its openly hostile and unsociable community. According to the game's senior technical designer, Kimberly Vall, the team cannot expect to eradicate toxicity given that more than 100 million people play the game. Instead, they introduced a system that was designed to incentivize good behavior by offering rewards to those who play by the rules. At the same time, it is questionable whether stricter measures would put an end to harassment in online games. Reporting systems are built onto the belief that someone actually takes the time to report other players for inappropriate behavior, whereas it's imaginable that players just give up entirely and instead refuse to engage any further in online video games when they're constantly faced with harassment. If the goal is to encourage young girls and women to engage with gaming culture to a greater extent, it's also unavoidable to encourage game developers to create games that are more compatible with female interests and desires. Boosting the presence of female role models within games and within video game culture can fight the stereotype of the predominantly male subculture. Especially role models within the subculture can be influential, as the importance of content creators on YouTube and Twitch continues to thrive. While employing more women in management and design-relevant areas of the video game industry can be a way of improving video game content and gender representation in general, it also presents an issue of itself. How can working in the video game industry be made more appealing to women? Many women in the industry have explained that they do not want to be reduced to their presence as females in the video game industry. Instead, they want to be noticed for their work. While male developers can focus on their work itself, female developers are often also expected to discuss their presence as females in the industry, thus reinforcing their marginalization. Obviously, there is no magic bullet that can solve all of the aforementioned issues. Instead, significant change in this field should be anticipated to come rather slowly. Moreover, the aforementioned suggestions can only help improve certain segments of the industry. The underlying issue, however, remains completely unfazed. The strict division of traditional gender roles in contemporary society has created clear boundaries concerning the allocation of functions. Women, and men too for that matter, still face a lack of acceptance for choosing certain occupations. It's only when we as a society open up for the long overdue debate that we can expect wide-ranging changes.